Hello and welcome. This is Mouse Gunner, and we're back with some more Automation the Car Company Tycoon game, continuing on with the campaign roleplay of the Edison Car Company in 1991. Now, there's been a little bit of a delay since my last video, and some of that is just time constraints in my personal life and everything. I had to take a little bit of a break from the series, and I am going to have to uh, scale back my coverage a little bit. I have been doing 2 videos a week in the past. I'm probably going to have to bring that down to 1 video a week. So I hope you guys are patient with me on that. In any case, let's get back into our series here. So from this point on, I'm just going to be focusing on engines. I'm going to do the engine builds, and then we'll focus on the car builds later. I think that helps with continuity, doing one engine after another, so you can kind of see how that builds. And when I do the car builds, I'll do what I have been doing in my past videos, kind of refer back to the engine so you can kind of see what it's like and kind of remind yourself of what it's like. But I just think that helps the series flow a little bit, at least in my mind, and for me it does. So that's the way we're going to do it. In any case, in the last video, we went ahead and we made the Luna engines for 1991. So now we're going to be making the Star engines for 1991. And mostly what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing a revision of the BB91 engine, and we're also going to be bringing the BS series of engines into the 1991 year. It was a brand new engine in 86, so we'll just be updating it for 91. So let's go ahead and hop into the BB91 first. And we'll be doing a revision of this, as this is an engine we've already built, but it is going to be a variant. So what I'm going to do here is clone and then grab the new variant. And the one thing that if I remember correctly, I did is I allowed for some leeway in the family capacity versus the variant capacity. And in this case, if I remember correctly, if we bring this thing out to its maximum extent, it comes around to 2.4 liters, which is exactly what I'm looking for the displacement of this engine. It does look like it's knocking at this point, though, so we are going to have to deal with that probably really quickly here. To deal with the knocking, I'm going to just scale back the compression a little bit, which gets rid of the knocking immediately. So now what we're going to want to do is just kind of refine this engine and get it to where we want it to be. So at the moment, looks like our numbers coming in around 5,400 RPM. I'm going to assume that's pretty close to the peak. I don't think that's probably changed too much. So let's see what happens if we increase. Nope, that was not what we wanted to do. And if we decrease. So yeah, we're right at the peak where we want to be with our RPM limit. So there's no need for changes there. I'm thinking with our compression, we'll probably bring that up, but I'll just back off the ignition timing a little bit. And that might actually just be all we need to do, is just backing off this ignition timing a little bit. We do have to keep in mind where our power is coming in. That will change, and it looks like it already has. Now, we're not knocking anymore, but again, as I said, we're having a little bit of issues. Well, not issues, but the change of where the power comes in has happened. So we do have to see if we're still at our peak, and it does look like that is where we need to be as far as our performance index. And that's usually my general rule. I like to have about 400 RPM beyond where the power comes in. If you didn't have this performance index to go off of, which, in the past we didn't. But now that you have the performance index, you can figure out exactly where that peak is. But even still, you always have to compromise reliability. As you can see, backing this off 1 point gives us almost 2 points of reliability. That's a pretty significant change. So, and a lot of that is due to our conrods and pistons starting to not do so well. And, a lot of that has to do with we have a longer stroke engine, a little bit bigger displacement. We're asking a little bit more of those pistons and conrods. So as far as everything goes, though, I think I'm pretty happy with this engine where it is. It's just a little bit of a bump up. We're going to have to look at the numbers, though, and maybe I should come back and look at that. One thing I really should look at, though, is the exhaust diameter. Is it still where we want it? It does look like it is. So I'm going to go ahead and call this the 2.4 variant. And I don't think we need to change anything with our, excuse me, with our fuel system, as it is already the single point EFI. I don't think we're going to get any better performance out of it. We could change with our fuel type, but this being the Star engine, I don't see a point of that. Maybe if we have a variant of this for the another engine, I mean not engine, car like the Constellation. I'm not sure if we would have a 4-cylinder engine in our Constellation, but if we did, maybe we'd bump that up to premium fuel or something. But I think this is where we want to be. So I'm going to go ahead and save that up, but I, of course, will do a comparison here and see it really is worth the difference here. So let's go ahead and go back to our engines. We'll go ahead and look at this variant right away. So it looks like it's mostly an improvement of about 10 horsepower, 10 foot-pounds of torque, a little bit more, a little bit less than 10 horsepower, but it's close enough. Emissions look about the same. Responsiveness looks about the same. Loudness. Smoothness is a little bit worse, but that makes sense. Production units is exactly the same. It costs a little bit more, though. Bigger engine. More materials required. And reliability is not quite so good, and we kind of saw how that was. Economy, though, again, paradoxically, I never can sometimes figure out this game, is actually better, which you would think with a bigger displacement it wouldn't be, but according to the game it is, and it's a little heavier, engine's bigger, so that makes sense. In any case, let's go ahead and build our new engine, which is mostly just going to be an update of the BS series, but let's go ahead and hop into that. We're going to have to build it from scratch, though, because it's 1991, and of course, the first thing we're going to want to do is put this on 1991. Before we get too much into the engine build here, as I've done in previous videos, I like to, whenever I'm in a new era and I'm building an engine type for the first time, the engine type we're going to be building is a V6, I like to refer to the engines that Chevy had available at that time period, or in 1991. So Chevy had a couple engines, V6s, I guess I should say, available at the time. You had the base V6 that was in the Camaro RS Coupe, the Cavalier Z24, the Beretta GT, and the Lumina Euro. And optional in the Cavalier Wagon, Corsica, Beretta, and Beretta GTZ, as well as the Lumina. This was an overhead valve V6 with a cast iron block and head. Its displacement was 191 cubic inches, or 3.1 liters, which is pretty close to the 3 liters we'll be building. It had a compression ratio of 8.8 and had 140 horsepower at 4,400 RPM and 180 foot-pounds of torque at 3,800 RPM. It had port fuel injection. The other engine is a base V6 in the Lumina Z34. This is a dual overhead cam engine. Now, the interesting thing is it says 16 valve here, and doing the math, I'm not exactly sure how many valves per cylinder that would be, because you have a V6, and if you did the math, 2 times 6 would be 12, and then 3 times 6 would be 18, and 4 times 6 would be 24. So unless this is a typo, and this is either supposed to be a V8, or it's supposed to be 18 or 12 or something like that. There's some kind of math error here. So I couldn't tell you if it was 2 valves per cylinder, 3 valves per cylinder, or 4 valves per cylinder, because it says 16 valve, and I don't know what that means. Any case, it's cast iron block and aluminum head. Its displacement comes in at 207 cubic inches, which is 3.4 liters, which, again, makes me believe this is a V6 we're talking about. Its compression ratio is 9.25. Its horsepower comes in at 210 at 5,200 RPM and 215 foot-pounds of torque at 4,000 RPM. So this has port fuel injection. So my reference is a little flawed here with how many valves per cylinder, but this is obviously a higher output engine that we're referring to here. So probably not comparable to what we're going to be building, but it's worth referencing at this point for future V6s we'll be building. In any case, let's go ahead and get into our car build. So we'll be updating the BS series here, and to do that, I'm going to need a V6. It's going to be cast iron. Its displacement comes in at 86.5, and its stroke comes in at 85.1. Gives us close to 3 liters. We need to have this be an overhead cam, a single overhead cam with 2 valves per cylinder, and we were cast head as well. Now, pistons, I believe, were cast iron, and hypereutectic. And the varying capacity is exactly the same. Compression ratio at the time was 8. And as I've said in previous videos, it's going to be pretty difficult to match the compression ratio stats of real-life engines. That's always been something that's difficult to do. Well, it's not impossible to do, but that's a topic unto itself, is the way compression ratio is represented in the game. I've referred to it before, but let's move on. Cam profiles comes in at 35, and the style, we'll do something... it looks like there's one kind of style. I don't remember what color we colored this. I'll make it blue. Okay, moving along. This is going to be naturally aspirated. You don't have turbocharged V6s yet in the game anyway. It's fuel and... Well, it would have been carburetor. It would have been a 2-barrel carburetor, but we're going to be upgrading it to single-point EFI. And we're going to be using regular fuel, as this is the Star. Now, it was at a fuel mixture of 15. I think we'll be okay with that. And the ignition timing came in at 51, and the RPM limit was at 5,900 RPM. Our exhaust was short cast, single, with a 2-inch, not that far, with a 3-way cat. Now, it had double reverse flow mufflers, but just as I did with the Luna engine, I'm only going to put one on. I think that's only really appropriate to have 2 in the Constellation, which is supposed to be our more comfort-oriented engine/car. So I'm not so concerned about the noise, at least in these less expensive vehicles. So that's pretty much the setup. Let's go ahead and run our test and see what happens. So not bad initially, but it looks like we have room to move for one. And what did I say that one V6 was? It was, if I remember correctly, 140 horsepower, and it was 180 foot-pounds of torque. That we probably will struggle to match, but I think the horsepower we can pretty easily do. I mean, it's only a difference of 5. And I think that's what we're going to push for. So let's see what we've got here. It looks like, as far as reliability goes, we're doing okay. I don't see any color changes. Let's see our exhaust diameter. I'm going to assume it's at where it needs to be. As we increase it, it just gets it worse. Let's go ahead and look. Now, definitely we can move our ignition timing, as well as our probably... The compression we don't have a whole lot of room with, because we only have a few points here to work with, which might not be quite enough. I'm also going to assume that we need to move our RPM limit, at least that 400 that I usually talk about. But it looks like our peak is somewhere around 6,200. So we'll keep it on there, but that did plummet our reliability quite a bit, because we were at 5,900. And that was at 62, and we're going to lose, I think, roughly about close to 4 points there in our reliability, which is pretty significant. Now, obviously, we didn't get any horsepower from that either. Let's go ahead and just play with our ignition timing here, which I assumed would move this around a little bit. But there's only so much we can increase this before we run into that. So let's see what happens if we scale this back a little bit. So it looks like 6,200 RPM is still our peak. I'm actually going to bring it back to 6,100. But at this point, I think what we can do is we can probably mess with our cam profile here, as it appears that where our power is coming in isn't really changing. This is going to give us more room to mess with things. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with 39 there. That really increased our power, 145 horsepower. Again, we're not to the torque levels that Chevy engine was, but I'm not trying to reproduce exactly what Chevy did. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. I don't think I can up the compression ratio, as will knock if I do that. So, and if I mess with the ignition timing too much, it might actually affect us negatively, although it doesn't look like it is so far. I'm just going to keep an eye on where that power is coming in, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it at 57, although we can get away with 58. I don't really see a benefit in doing that. And let's mess with our RPM limit here. So cutting it off does hurt our performance index. It probably is still at the 6,200 number, I'm going to assume here. But just for reliability's sake, I'm going to bring it down to 6,000, which brings us back into having everything be green, which I'm pretty happy with. And then we'll go ahead and check our exhaust diameter again, because we did change the performance a little bit, but doesn't look like we really need to change it. It looks like 2 inches is still our ideal. So we ended up with 146 horsepower at 5,400 RPM and 163 foot-pounds of torque. So again, we didn't match the numbers that the Chevy engine was producing as torque-wise, but we did match or actually exceed the horsepower numbers. So that's good in my book, especially seeing how we're slightly a little bit less displacement. I think that's where I'd like to save it. So we're going to go ahead and call this the BS 91, and we'll save this as the 3-liter variant. All right, so let's go ahead and look at our engines, which I already kind of did with the inline 4s, but let's go ahead and look at them anyway. So the main two engines we'll be using is the BB91 and the BS91 for our star, and we'll be using the 2.4 liter variant for that star. So we got 116 horsepower. We already kind of went over this one, but let's go ahead and look at the comparison between the BS86, which is our old engine, and this one. So we'll be looking at the 2 3-liter variants. So it looks like we jumped up a little over 14 horsepower. We gained almost, I would say 9. It's close to 9 foot-pounds of torque. So not as much improvement there. We definitely reduced emissions quite a bit. But again, you have to consider that this is carburetor, 2-barrel carburetor versus a fuel injection, electronic fuel injection. So there's a big difference there. Responsiveness, I think, is also probably down to that. You have loudness. This is a much quieter engine, and we kind of already discussed that we reduced how many reverse flow mufflers we had, so that's where that comes from. Smoothness is exactly the same. Production units goes up a little bit, but again, you have to understand the fuel injection being added on is probably contributing to that, as well as the cost difference. Reliability is a lot better, which is what I'd like to see as time goes on. You want to see reliability go up. Economy looks better by a pretty good margin, so that's good to see. And otherwise, weight is a little bit less, so that's nice improvement as well. In any case, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. This is Mouse Gunner, signing out.